So, as mentioned, this is our very first webinar for the Orchards for Schools programme, and being presented by myself, Richard Pollard, Lewis McNeil and Mary Jackson. Mary works for a very experienced educator and practitioner and advisor for schools, has worked in the UK and overseas. And Lewis is very experienced in the technical side of orchard planting schemes. So we've got a really good team to support us through the programme over the next year. What is the National Schools Programme? Well, it's into three parts, and my role as National Schools Programme Manager is to coordinate the whole of the programme across the UK. So we're reaching as far as the Shetland Isles, across to Northern Ireland, Wales and England. And there's three parts to that, and these the National Campaign, Force for Nature, Orchards for Schools Programme, funded by the Daily Mail, and the Young Tree Champions Programme in partnership with M&G Investment Bank. Who is the Tree Council? Well, the Tree Council has been running for a number of decades now, and over 7.5 million trees have been planted. 13 million tree warden volunteer hours have been given to organisations across the UK through the Tree Warden programme. And the Tree Council is a health advisor for DEFRA on tree health. As I say, we've got a really good team supporting us through this programme, and yeah, I'm sure look forward to digesting everything that they say. And please use the Q&A throughout. What is the National Schools Programme approach? It's a sustainable schools approach that we're using the framework of community, curriculum and campus to ensure that it's a whole school approach. We're also developing a seasonal programme of connecting, learning and sharing. So in the autumn months, as we approach the National Tree Planting Week in November, when all schools will be receiving their tree packs. That is a time for planting and connecting, of course, with trees on an emotional level as well. And then in the spring, of course, the growing of those trees and the learning happens, and then in the autumn, sharing. And the programme is really dedicated to ensure that helping children to connect at an emotional level as well when they're in their school grounds, and connect and grow their understanding and the value of trees and nature. So, as mentioned, there is offer of free tree packs coming. It's gone live on our website just 2 days ago, so please have a look at our website for that information. You probably already have ordered one, but if you haven't, then please visit and go to the school tab and Orchards for Schools to find your hedgerow or tree pack. With the hedgerow tree pack, you'll also receive a school's gift, and that would include a planner poster, some stickers for the children involved in your project, and a gift box. And the gift box is to be filled with lots of goodies and experiences, pictures and interesting ideas and things, and worksheets and things like that that you've created as part of your project, and then that is to be handed on to a new school as a gift to that school, with an invitation that we'll send you as well, encouraging that school to join the Orchards for Schools programme. There's also an Orchards for Schools guide that will be downloadable very soon, and that has a lot of information in it to help you plant, grow and care for your trees, considering the health and safety side of things, and also how you can encourage press and media to raise the profile of your project locally and nationally. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Lewis, who will be talking you through the planning process, site planning process that you'll need to consider when you're in your orchards this coming autumn or spring.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay there, Richard? Yeah?
Yes,
okay.
I can, yeah.
Good, good. Right, well, congratulations, everyone, for embarking on this school orchard journey. I've been working on school orchards now for over 10 years. And yeah, you're about to create a very long-lasting, very inspiring teaching resource that will grow with the children and grow with the staff and give you many, many benefits, so much more than just fruits and all of the educational opportunities that will come with that. And we hope this presentation, me and Mary together afterwards, should hopefully get you a little fired up and excited about it, get going. But first of all, we're going to talk a little bit specifically about the needs of the trees, and really to encourage you to start putting some thought into where your trees are going to be planted, where your orchard is going to go in your grounds, because trees do not like to be moved. They're not evolved to be moved. Once they're in there, once those roots are down, they're not going to be very happy if you have to move them around. So the more thought you can put into this at this point, the better. So really, we're going to look a little bit around the needs of the trees, but then also considering the needs of you as staff and, for example, ease of accessing the orchard and taking classes there and things like that. So first of all, we'll talk about the trees' needs. So kind of basics really. With most plants, it's simply a case of planting them somewhere where they're going to get enough sunlight. Fruiting plants require a decent amount of sun. So you're looking for somewhere that's going to ideally have 6 to 8 hours of sun a day during the spring and summer. Don't worry too much about this. Just probably know your school grounds quite well, and just the main message is a nice sunny site there. Yeah, I'm not completely sure actually what different varieties of apples you'll be getting. If you're getting any cooking apples or cooking plums or pears within this pack, you'll have to check when they arrive. If you do have a slightly shadier spot within your designated orchard site that you've chosen, then as a general rule of thumb, cooking fruits require less sunlight hours and they can go into a slightly shadier space, but still they're going to need some sun. So shelter's quite important. You may well have somewhere, if you're lucky enough to have a good sized school field that's quite open, but do consider that in order for successful pollination to occur, we do need a certain amount of shelter so that the blossoms aren't getting damaged in any late kind of winter storms that might occur, in the spring while the trees are in blossom. Pollinators as well don't tend to be out and about that often. Many of the pollinators anyway, some of them will forage in inclement weather, but generally we need a bit of shelter. So if you have got an exposed site, you might want to consider planting some sort of windbreak, and we can talk a bit about that in the next session we'll be doing anyway. Soil, don't get too caught up or too worried about soil. You don't need to be a soil scientist or anything to get this right, but essentially we don't want to plant the trees anywhere where there's standing water in the winter. So if you're doing some kind of survey and assessing your whole school grounds, make sure that you're not going to plant somewhere where there's bad drainage, okay, because fruit trees don't like their feet wet for too long and cause you all kinds of problems. So well drained soil, kind of ideally a nice sort of loamy soil. But again, we're going to talk a little bit about rootstocks in a moment, the root systems of these trees, and the ones that have been chosen for you happen to be ones that are kind of a little less fussy in their requirements from the soil. So don't get too worried about the soil. As long as it's deep enough to get a couple of spade lengths down and we break it up nicely at planting, then we can improve the soil over time through additions, and we'll talk about that in subsequent the next webinar and through the resources. But importantly, a source of water, because one of the great things about an orchard is, compared to a lot of growing, it's actually requires overall very little input from us compared to the yields we get back. So actually it's a really good ratio for work in and what we get back from the trees, because once the tree's roots are established, the tree can by and large account for its own needs. But there is an upfront effort involved in the first few years after planting, and that will involve us watering the trees, particularly in the first year, second year, maybe third year. But the first year is really, really crucial. So having somewhere close by where we can get water is really, really key. So ideally a tap, but also maybe start having a look at any roof space that you might be able to harvest water from. And we'll look at some water storage and collection strategies in the next webinar. Okay, next slide, please. Richard. Okay, so this is just, we're not going to get too caught up here looking at different rootstock sizes. Long story short, most fruit trees you buy today are made up of two parts: your above ground part of the tree, which is called the scion, and then your root system, which is called the rootstock. And you select different trees with different rootstock sizes, and ultimately they'll give you a different ultimate size tree. So what you can see here is that's like an average maybe person there, an adult of about 2 meters height. And actually, if you look across to the right hand side of that diagram, what you're going to be getting is actually trees that are semi-vigorous. So not the biggest size, not the big old huge fruit trees, but quite a large fruit tree if the conditions are good, if they're looked after well, and if the soil is good. In all likelihood, they probably won't grow quite as big as like 4 meters plus. So it's probably around 4 meters, and that will be after about 7 or 8 years of growth. Now you might ask, well, why are we getting trees that are that size compared to, you know, when there's options of having these really, really small ones, the very dwarfing trees? Because of course we want the children to be able to look after the trees and interact with the trees. But basically, the smaller you go with these rootstocks, the smaller the root system is, and it's almost like keeping a tree in a more juvenile state. And if you look at that very dwarfing tree there, the M27 rootstock, that's going to be something you're going to have to water lots and lots throughout its whole life. You're going to have to feed it extra. It's going to have to remain staked for its whole life because its root system is not significant enough for it to look after itself. So in terms of, like, you know, looking after the trees during the summer and stuff, it's not a very robust tree. So actually, this semi-vigorous, what you get is, it's nice because you're getting a decent sized tree. So that's actually really good for wildlife. You're going to get more biodiversity benefits there. But importantly, it's going to be a long-lived tree. These very small ones, you'll be lucky if they live, you know, kind of like 10 plus years and they become less productive. But this semi-vigorous is going to be something that will be there for 80 plus years if they're looked after. And to an extent, depending on how we prune the tree, we can ensure that it does have low branches if we train it as a bush form, that the children will easily be able to harvest. So this is important because this determines how far apart you're going to plant your trees. So spacing is really, really key, that we don't plant the trees too close together so that their canopies on intertwined, and that causes all kinds of issues with competition for light, but also disease and stuff because of the congestion of the branches. So for this size rootstock, I'd suggest, if you can, you want to give a minimum of 4 meters between trunks. So at planting, when you're planting your holes, those holes need to be a minimum of 4 meters apart, ideally 5. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, Richard, please. Okay, so just looking at this here, basically, in case you're a school that doesn't necessarily have like a big space in mind for these trees, or doesn't have the luxury of a, you know, large field with an area where you're going to plant these trees, there are other options. And so I just included a photo here of a really impressive school orchard that I worked with in West London, and they had a whole area of sort of an old playground that was disused, and they didn't have any bare ground to plant into. So they actually went for a container orchard, and they've got 12 trees in containers that are thriving at the moment. So trees in containers can be done. Trees don't necessarily really like to be in containers, obviously, because they've got quite large root systems. But if you can go for a really good large container, these ones are about 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. So, you know, they're kind of a decent volume of soil there. They were knocked up actually by one of the, a parent of the school, one of the children of the school, who was in construction and actually did them at a really good price for the school. So something that's going to be really robust. Obviously, if you're going to go for container trees, then they do need extra watering. They are going to need extra feed because those roots are limited and stuff, but it can be done. But we're going to be sharing some resources. And of course, don't forget that you're going to have additional resources and support for the Orchards for Schools website and the resources that are on there. And the picture over here on the left is actually just showing that trees, fruit trees, can also be planted. Oh no, I didn't say change slide, sorry. Forgive my assistant here. On the left hand side, we've got the wall space, and you can train trees as two-dimensional forms. So if you have some good wall space, you can actually plant the trees quite close to the walls. Don't worry about, another thing back to these root systems, don't worry about them causing any issues with subsidence or damage to any structures. They're not powerful or large enough root systems to do that. So you can plant these up against buildings without any problems. So just something to consider if space is an issue for you. Next slide, please.
Got about 10 minutes or so, please.
Okay, yeah. Other considerations. So thinking back to this idea that you may well think, oh, well, we could plant the trees at the far side of the playing field. That'd be great. There's loads of space there. But in reality, you know, depending on what the culture of outdoor teaching is at your school, how likely is it that staff are going to go out there and take classes across the field to use that for a lesson, for example? So really want you to have this in mind, thinking of this as a teaching resource, something that the children are hopefully going to be interacting with frequently, and staff. So make it easy for yourselves if you can. Plant it closer to the school so you've got easy access and it's valued and issued frequently. Bear in mind the size of those trees. If you've got any school neighbours, might be worth letting them know. Letting them know they're not going to be huge trees, not going to be a big old oak tree or an ash tree, but you know, trees of up to 4 meters. So you may want to consider who lives nearby, if there is neighbours near the site. Looking at zones of activity. So thinking about where are the really popular play areas of the school, like are these trees going to get battered by footballs, for example? So it might be worth considering that when you're looking at planting, because initially these trees are quite vulnerable, the branches quite easily to break. Spacing I've already mentioned. Really key thing on planting day is to make sure you mark out those digging, the pits for the trees really clearly before any digging happens. It's very easy in the hecticness of the planting day to everyone get excited, and before you know it, everyone's planted the trees really close together. Also going forward, not necessarily for now, but considering creating some sort of outdoor shelter within your orchard so that we can take lessons out there during all conditions and all lessons. And thinking of the orchard as not just a collection of fruit trees, but a place where we can have events and celebration, apple day celebration, all kinds of you know, kind of fairs and activities there, and bring in the public in as well. If you're going to look at this as a great opportunity for bringing in the public, that might be a factor in determining where you position your orchard in terms of you know, safety implications of having public access and everything like that. So just a few extra considerations there when picking your site. Next slide, please.
And also permission as well, just landowner permission, really important. We've included that in the guidance. Make sure that you have landowner permission before you.
Absolutely. And another thing not to overlook is make sure, in fact, I've just been in touch with the school today that we were going to go ahead with them this year to plant an orchard, but they've just realised that in 12 months' time they're doing a lot of major works in that area, which means we can't guarantee the trees are going to not get destroyed by large vehicles and you know, contractors and stuff. So long-term use of that site, have we got to go ahead for, you know, decades? There's not going to be a new plastering built out there next year or something. Okay, a little word on actually receiving your trees. So your trees, when they arrive, are going to be bare rooted trees. That means they've been taken out of the ground at the nursery, the soil's been removed from the roots, and essentially you're going to get a tree that's dormant because they're deciduous trees. They won't have any leaves on by the time you get them in the winter, and there's not going to be soil on the roots. So don't worry, they're not dead. They look like that. They're meant to look like that. You will get them in a cardboard box probably. So it's really key to ensure that reception knows to expect these trees and to know what to do with them, because I've had situations where reception's got this big package, didn't know who it is for, stuck it in an overheated room for a week before anyone discovered it was there, in which time the trees had dried out. So they need to be stored. If you're not going to use them immediately, they need to be stored somewhere cool and dry, not somewhere that's going to freeze, not somewhere that's going to get baked. And actually, it's not ideal, but if need be, they can be kept in the same packaging as they arrive for up to 2 weeks before you put them in the ground. But ideally, you want to use them as soon as possible. If your planting isn't until, say, January and you're receiving these trees in November, don't worry. Then basically what you can do is you can temporarily plant them somewhere outside. So they don't need to be upright. They can be laying down like this. It's called heelinging, where you just rest them on their side. As long as the roots are covered and they're somewhere sheltered, they can stay put for, you know, a couple of months or so. So that's not too much of an issue. And just one note, when it comes to planting day, make sure when they come out of the package, they get a good soaking, put them in a good bucket of water, and yeah, give them a good soaking before they go on the ground. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so again, you don't have to go all out on this, but anything you can do now between now and planting in terms of looking at your site and thinking about the conditions of the site will really go a long way to helping you get the right tree in the right place and get the trees off to the best start. So really, this is just about getting out there, ideally with the pupils, get them involved at all stages of this project to really get full engagement there. And, you know, kind of create a plan of where your trees are going to go. It'd be really useful on the day to have a plan so you can mark out the trees easily and everyone knows what's going where. But it's also a good opportunity just to kind of get to know the area a bit better, looking at the sunny areas, the windy areas, thinking about any underground services and stuff that you might want to avoid when you're digging. And you know, using that going forward to kind of think about what else you might want in your orchard going forward, benches, additional things like soft fruit bushes and everything. So it could be part of a wider consultation about what people want from the orchard, what the children want to do in the orchard, what the staff want from the orchard. Does the kitchen want cooking apples from the orchard? You know, get everybody's input and get it up on the wall and celebrate it and get everyone excited about this new orchard. Next slide. Okay, we're going to go through this very briefly. So basically, there's a few tips when planting a tree that are really key to get the tree off to a good start. So first of all, we're going to, as I said, mark out your positions, and then we're going to do square pits. And the reason is sometimes roots, if they grow into particularly a clayish soil, they hit the edge of a circular pit and they might go round and round instead of penetrating out into the surrounding soil. With a square soil, the idea is they go into a corner and there's nooks and crannies then for them then to sort of like get some purchase and penetrate out. We're encouraging those roots out into the wider soil as soon as we can. So you want, you know, about twice the width of the roots and ideally about twice the depth of the roots. A good spade depth, ideally a bit deeper if possible. Break up the ground underneath as much as you can and use a spade to sort of slice into the sides of the pit so the roots have got somewhere to get into. Next one, please. So don't lose your soil when you're doing this. So basically, when you're digging the soil out, try and capture all of that. So put your mulch mat down, I'll talk about in a moment, or some cardboard. Put that spoil, that turf onto that so that you can easily get it all back in, because that's all going to go back into the pit. And if you just put it into the grass, it's quite hard to get that soil back out again. Remove any large stones. And at this point, unless you've got really, really, really bad soil, we're not going to add any compost or anything to that, just all of the soil that goes back in, because we want to encourage the roots out into the surrounding soil. We don't want to fill it with nutrient rich stuff that the roots wake up and they don't need to move out into inferior soil. So don't need to add anything here. And it's best to do the pits on the actual day if possible, because, you know, UV light can actually damage the life forms down there, and if you dig a pit weeks in advance, it might have negative impacts on the soil life. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I said, about a spade's depth, retaining all of that soil, and then actually what you're going to find is on each tree there is an obvious bulge on the stem where the two bits of tree that I was talking about have been grafted together, the scion and the root system. That's really obvious, and that's called the graft union. And that bulge, which you can just about make out on this picture, needs to be above the ground. Okay, so you can mark out, usually these trees, you should be able to see on the stem a sort of dampness line that indicates where the tree was planted up to in the nursery. So you can use a cane to put across the top of a pit like this to measure up where the tree should be sitting. Have one child to hold the tree nice and upright, while a few others kind of start to backfill and make sure the tree sort of keeps at that level height. We don't want to plant the trees too deep is the main point there. Next slide. Okay, this is something you may choose to do. You can buy something called root grow, which is actually the spores of a particular type of fungus called the mycorrhizal fungi, which actually over 95% of land plants depend upon to survive. And essentially, upon becoming damp, these fungi will spread through the soil. And if you go to the next slide, please, Richard, they essentially create a secondary root system for the tree. So if you've got poor soil, this is well worth doing because it will really help to get the tree off to a good start. And it can take up to 4 or 5 years for the tree to naturally make that kind of relationship. So if you can get hold of some of that stuff, you can usually buy little sachets of it from garden centres, then it's well worth adding at this point. You just sprinkle it on the roots before you plant. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to cover the ground around each tree with mulch. So first put down something like a mulch mat. This could be some old jute sack, or it could be some mulch mats that you buy, or simply some thick cardboard which you can collect. If you do use cardboard, make sure it's damp before you put it on the ground and before you put the mulch over the top. So the next slide, quickly look at mulch. And I'm going to go into mulch a little bit more in the next session, but it's really important for you to get the mulch ready for the planting day because it's a nice thing to do. So, and it's an important thing to do. So a thick layer of wood chip mulch, okay? So if you go to the next slide, and ideally, you don't want to get stuff from garden centres that's actually been sort of dyed. What you want to do is find a local tree surgeon. Oh, go back one, sorry, please, Richard. You want to find a tree surgeon locally, ideally, who will bring you some hardwood wood chip. I think we missed a slide there, Richard. Did you skip one? Yeah, that one, thanks. Yeah, so some of the key benefits here for using mulch, it's going to stop competition from other plants. It's going to make your watering go further because it acts like a lid on the surface that prevents evaporation. So it'll keep the soil nice and moist. And also it serves as a handy barrier, a visual barrier to stop grounds maintenance from getting too close to the trees with trimmers or mowers. Next slide again, please, Richard. Okay, and you can see there you want ideally, you know, a minimum, I'd say, of sort of 10, 15 centimeters depth there in order for it to do its job and stop light getting through for the grass and things underneath to grow back through. Next one. How I got time-wise, I suspect not long now. How many minutes? 1 minute, okay. So you're going to get some gourds and stakes with your pack. Next slide, please. And it's really important.
That's the last one.
That's it, okay, great. Yeah, so yeah, there we go. Any more tips and stuff like that, any more particular things around planting, feel free to get in touch with me. But yeah, there we go.
Yeah, brilliant, much, Lewis. And yeah, as Lewis mentioned right at the end, any more tips and questions that you might have, we'll send round an email so you can contact us through schools@treecouncil.org. And so please, the recording's been recorded, so the webinar's been recorded, so you can play back any points that you might have missed. And we'll also add to the Q&A throughout. Any questions that you have, please add to the Q&A or the chat. Thanks. And just moving on to the curriculum elements of planning your program in your schools and considerations how you embed that into your school improvement plans. Passing over to Mary.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you, Lewis. That's a really useful kind of starting point. And so what I'm going to be doing is looking at how you embed this whole thing of having an orchard into your curriculum, into how you use that resource as a really valuable. I think Lewis said right at the beginning that how important and how useful trees are in school grounds and how they can be really useful, valuable teaching resource. So just going to start by saying, right, why do we take learning outdoors? And I'm not going to kind of cover all these elements, but one of the things about it is that we know a lot of young people are really worried about the environment, and they've been given an opportunity, some of them at least, to kind of say something about that. But often they don't get a chance to really do much about it. And so one of the things that they can do is to plant trees. And so to give them that opportunity is a really great and important thing for them to do, and a lifelong experience, something they'll be able to take way beyond school and into their life beyond school. There's all sorts of other reasons. There's tons of curriculum stuff which we will look at in a minute. It's great fun. We know the mental health benefits of being outdoors. I think a lot of people have realised during COVID that actually that time they spend outdoors is absolutely vital to their mental health. So that in itself is a good reason to be outside. And the fact that actually outdoors, as we all know, is much safer from COVID than actually sitting inside as well. So lots of good reasons for being outside. Thank you, Richard. And if you create an orchard in your school grounds, you have a resource that is there all year for all round year-round learning. It changes in every season. An orchard will change in every season. In the spring, you have the flowers. In the summer, you will see wonderful vegetation, the leaves, and then the autumn, towards the autumn, you get the fruit, and then the winter, you've got a different form as well. So all through the year, you will see something different. Thank you, Richard. And it's a really great opportunity to involve everybody within your school and even your local community as well. So loads of people can get involved. We always recommend, and Lewis has kind of suggested this already, that the pupils should be very much involved in the whole process of developing and designing and creating and planting and caring for your orchard. They are always the experts of your school grounds. They will know much more about your school grounds than most of the staff. Use their expertise. They know where it's hot and sunny. They know where it's freezing cold in the winter and wind whistles across the site. So use that expertise when you're planning your site. But it's also great to involve the wider community as well. There are lots of opportunities for doing that. One of the things that Richard's already mentioned is that there are a local tree warden scheme that the Tree Council run, and you may well be able to get those involved in your project as well. So those are volunteers who volunteer for the Tree Council as a tree warden, but they've got lots of expertise in trees and are really keen to share that with younger people as well. If you're not Scottish, you may go, who is the janitor? That really is your caretaker or ground staff. So getting those members of staff involved as well is really, really important. The school grounds get cared for by your ground staff, but they can get cared for also to a certain extent by your pupils as well. But everybody needs to know what each other is doing, why they're doing it, and when they're doing it. So you need to talk to those people right from the start. One of the things about any school grounds development, it is no good creating something you can't maintain in the long term. And that may well be that your pupils can get involved with that, but it may also require your ground staff to get involved. So you just really need to make sure you've got that clear right from the start. Thanks, Richard. Next one. Oh, they're going quicker now. So involving the pupils, as I say, they can get involved from the start, but there's lots of different ways they can get involved. We always encourage schools to use a risk-benefit approach rather than a straight risk assessment. So what you do first is whatever activity or whatever you're creating in your school grounds, you first of all look at the benefits of what you're doing. What are the pupils getting out of this? What is the wider community getting out of this? And then you look at the risks that you need to do in order to do that. You'll see here we've got some young people. This is Lewis a few years ago, helping these young people to plant a tree. And you might think, oh, there's quite a risk with a child with a big mallet and bashing in that tree stake. But actually, if they didn't do that, we wouldn't have a tree that survived. And the benefits are greater, especially if you teach them how to do it properly. But another part of that is that young people themselves understanding how to assess risk. It's really important that they themselves know what is safe, what is dangerous, and then they can assess the risks themselves. And just one thing to say is look out for the Tree Council Young Tree Champion programme that is linked to this, and there'll be lots of resources and ideas of helping getting young people in your school engaged with trees. Next slide, please. So there are lots of resources that can help you. Obviously there's resources on the project website. There are existing resources that you might find useful already. Learning Through Landscapes produced a School Orchards publication a few years ago, and that's available for you to access. Another really useful resource has been produced by the Forth Environment Link, which is a group in Scotland. This teacher's resource pack, lots of ideas there. And obviously the Tree Council Orchards for Schools guide is coming soon. And there's lots of ways that you can think about your orchard and use it. Wonderful for biodiversity. Really, you'll see pollinating insects all over your fruit trees. And we know there's a real decline in pollinating insects because of lack of habitat, amongst other things. So if you can create an orchard, you are really helping that first rung on the food chain of getting pollinating insects into your school grounds. With orchards, you can look at culture and nature and all sorts of things. It's a really valuable resource. So just going to think about how you can link your curriculum to that whole process of designing and planting your orchard. So as Lewis has already talked about, he's talked about creating plans of your site. So if you're doing that and you're surveying your school grounds to see where you might put your orchard, you can learn about drawing things to scale, drawing plans to scale. Lewis has said you need, 4 meters between trees. How big is that? Let's measure that out on the ground. Let's add those dimensions to a scale plan of your site so that you can see where the trees can go and how far they need to be apart and how many you will fit into different spaces in your ground. So you can either do that kind of 1-to-1 scale out on the ground, or you can create plans and maps of your site and put them in to scale, or you can do both. Creating a model of what you're wanting to plant is also really, really useful. It gives you a visual idea. And for some people, just looking at a plan, a 2-dimensional plan, is really difficult to kind of relate that to the real life. So if you can create a model, it just makes that a little bit more kind of realistic and you can see what you're trying to do. You will be doing site surveys. Lewis has talked about, looking at the soil, looking at the wind and the shelter and all those kind of things. So do undertake surveys. That fits in again really well with science curriculum and maths curriculum. There's a lot of maths in this type of thing, lots of measuring to do, lots of data to collect. And another area for maths is making sure you can budget for your project. In this project, we're lucky. Schools are getting trees for free. That's fantastic. But if you want to add anything else to your orchard, you will need to think about how much is that going to cost us? Can we afford to put in a bench? Can we afford to add some extra features to that ground? So you need to think about those. And then also think about where your materials and resources are coming from. Are we doing this in a sustainable way? Can we make sure that the resources that we're getting are from sustainable systems, from sustainable suppliers, and making sure we're doing it in an environmentally friendly way? Thanks, Richard. So there are lots of different things that you can do when learning about your trees. One of the things you can do is learning about grafting, which Lewis kind of mentioned, that you have a different rootstock at the bottom of your tree, as it were, to the tree that's on the top. And there's all sorts of, I'm sure Lewis will go in further webinars, or maybe if people are interested in this, in understanding why that is. If you were to plant a pip from an apple, you will not get the same apple tree that you planted. Apples work like human beings, they mix the genes. So if you want to know what kind of apple you're going to get, then you have to have that scion that is from that particular variety. And so you can choose to have different rootstocks on different varieties of apples. And that's a skill that your pupils might be interested in learning about. And then writing the instructions on how to do that and how to plant trees. So you've got some lovely literacy in there, thinking about how do we write instructions that somebody can follow easily. The other thing to think about, I mentioned the importance of aftercare and maintenance, and we've produced this book that is actually about maintaining school grounds in general for pollinating insects, but that means it's good for all wildlife, and it includes how do you think about maintaining your orchard, and that's including how the young people can get involved and how parents or ground staff can also get involved. Next one, please, Richard. So your orchard can be a fantastic facility for supporting biodiversity. The trees themselves, as I said before, are really fantastic for encouraging pollinating insects. So that is just planting trees, just planting fruit trees, you've already increased the biodiversity of your site. But then you might think of other things that you could add. So this planting here is in a wildflower meadow. And traditionally, a lot of orchards have wildflower meadows around them. You do need to be aware that that doesn't mean to say you just let things grow and you just plant your trees and forget them. There is more maintenance required than that, but it will mean that you're not kind of coming through with a gang mower. So you need to think about the long-term maintenance of a meadow, but it is something that can work really well and can be absolutely beautiful and fantastic for wildlife. And also think about creating specific features in. So Richard, if you can put on the next slide, please. You may want to add other habitats to your orchard. So here are a few habitats, log piles and bug hotels and things like that. And see if you can build your own rather than necessarily just buying in something off a shelf. It's a fantastic opportunity for children and young people to get involved in doing something practical. So we would encourage you to think about how you can do that using maybe recycled materials, such as you see here. These are a few wooden pallets making this bug hotel on the left. So lots of ways of getting involved here. I'm sure lots of you have done bug hotels before now, but fantastic to have one in your orchard. Next slide, please, Richard.
5 minutes.
Thank you. So just pointing you towards some other resources that are out there to support you, and this is particularly looking at biodiversity and pollinators. A project that Learning Through Landscapes ran. There's still a website up there that you can see the details of, and there's lots of resources, not just by us, but people like BugLife, Butterfly Conservation, Bumblebee Conservation Trust. So if you're interested in particularly looking at pollinators and expanding that within your orchard as an additional thing, lots of resources on that website too. Thanks, Richard. And I love these images. I just look at these and just think they are wonderful. I like to think I'm a bit of an artist myself, and so to see young people get enthused by art as well, I think it is lovely. And it is so much better for any art that if you can observe those insects yourselves rather than just looking at it in a book, if you can actually see what you're drawing and what you're painting, that brings everything to life. And also it helps people to really look and study. There are 24 different species of bumblebee in this country. And when you see a bumblebee fly by, maybe you don't think about that, but if you have to draw it and paint it, then you really have to look, what are the colours of that bumblebee? Why is it different from this bumblebee? And that therefore through observational drawing, you are learning more about the science behind the species as well. Thanks, Richard. Next one. And probably some more kind of obvious parts of the curriculum that you might think about as well are food chains and life cycles, energy flow, those kind of things. Obviously with a resource like your orchard, then you've got a fantastic resource where you're going to have more wildlife and more interest and hands-on learning. So again, it's not just in a book, you're seeing these things happen in real life, you're seeing the seasonal change, you're feeling it, you're tasting the seasonal change when you've got an orchard. Next one, please. And there's loads of surveys you can do, biodiversity surveys in your school grounds, not just insects, you can do that. And we've got, there is a national pollinator survey that you can do, but you can use bug traps, pitfall traps and pooters and magnifying glasses and all sorts of things to see what wildlife you've got in your grounds. And you maybe want to do a BioBlitz. If you have an orchard, you might want to do it before you plant your orchard and after. And BioBlitz is just taking a specific time and a specific area and just seeing what wildlife you've got on that day, at that time, in that space. So maybe you'll do a survey before and plant your orchard and do a survey afterwards and see if you have a change in the amount of wildlife that is in your school grounds. Now, it won't all happen at once, and if you're going out on a sunny day, you'll see more wildlife, more pollinators than on a cloudy, windy day. But if you do that over a number of years, you'll start to see a pattern, and hopefully you'll see more insects arriving in your school grounds. Thanks, Richard.
2 minutes, Mary.
Okay. Lots of other ways that you can get excited about your trees and link into the curriculum. Tree dressing, we all understand tree dressing because we all have Christmas trees, but tree dressing day is at the beginning of December when the leaves are off the tree, and the idea is that trees maybe look a bit bare, so why not brighten them up with adding some other bits of kind of art to them. Next one, please, Richard. Just a few other things to think about that you can look at when you've got an orchard. You can measure the trees year by year by year, see if they're growing, how fast they're growing. You can collect loads of data, look at the girth of the trees, height of the trees, how many pounds of apples, I should say kilos of apples that you're harvesting. Lots of things like that you can collect data and analyze that, turn it into graphs. So much more interesting using data that you have collected of something you have experienced than just, again, reading data off out of a book. Thanks, Richard. Next one. And whatever you are doing, please share that with the visitors who come into the school, other classes, other groups in the school. Celebrate your orchard project so that other people can see what you're doing and maybe ask you questions. But it also gives the young people pride in what they're doing. They're doing something that's important enough to share it with everybody else. Okay, thanks, Richard. And there's lots of other ways you can link it with other areas of the curriculum or other initiatives outside of the curriculum. You may well have heard of the Global Goals for Sustainable Development. It fits in very well with a number of those. So that might be something you want to link into. Things like eco schools as well, those kind of programs. But you may take a project that might be flowering, or it might be pollinators, and they again would link in very well with creating an orchard. Next one, please, Richard. Linking to wider global issues. Where do all our apples come from that are in the supermarkets? If young people go into a supermarket at different times of year, they will see apples coming from all over the world. What's the carbon footprint of that? How much better if they're producing their own, but understanding those international issues, the fact that what we buy has an impact on the whole world. Next one, please. And a great opportunity for, as you can see here, persuasive language. So it's writing that is, we've talked about instructional writing, this is persuasive writing, but it can also be creative writing, being inspired by maybe somebody who lives in your orchard. Maybe you've got some small creatures, or a bit like borrowers, or maybe you link to borrowers. So lots of writing opportunities through your orchard. Next one, please. I love this. Every autumn is Apple Day, and why not taste a whole load of different apples? I know one school who has got apple trees all around their grounds, and they've been growing them for years. They do lots of taste testing, then draw graphs of which ones everybody likes, analyze that data again using data gathered from something in your own school grounds. If you want to think about what does a quarter of a sphere look like? That's quite an abstract concept, but if you've got an apple, that's pretty much a sphere. You can cut it into 4 and straight away you know what a quarter of a sphere looks like. So that's really nice to see. So again, lots of links there, and I'm sure we'll look at further links in other webinars. Next one, Richard. Some more artwork, just showing you how exciting you can get and sharing. And pretty much last slide coming up, almost there. And this can be something that you really celebrate. This was one of the schools, I think, in the a project we did a few years ago, as you can see, 2011, but that'll be a permanent reminder that there was an orchard project in that school. So you might do temporary art, you might do permanent art. Next one then, Richard. So do look, there are lots of places with other useful information. Opal do a lot of citizen science resources, which link very well. There are lots of other projects and lots of other people with resources and information. So there's lots there, lots of information there. It's knowing where to go for it, and we can help with that. Last one, I think. So growing apples is just a start of a project for learning outside. Think about looking at biodiversity. Think about where you're getting your resources from. Think about that climate change, that global carbon footprint. Think about putting trees and fruit trees into cross-curricular projects. How can you do that? Think about maybe we're selling our produce at the end of it, or cooking with it. Think about how you're going to think about things in the long term and the sustainability, and lots of citizen science can be linked into as well. So just think, when you are teaching different parts of the curriculum, could we link this to our orchard project? Thanks, Richard.
Thank you so much, Mary. Fantastic. Really loads of information, loads of opportunities and inspiration for schools, I'm sure. And pass this webinar on to other contacts that you might have in school as well, other teachers, and they'll be able to access it on our website. So yeah, please forward this webinar on to other organisations. You can get the tree packs on our website, as mentioned earlier. Go to www.treecouncil.org.uk/schools and education. Orchards for Schools is a drop down on the menu. And yes, finally, thank you. And I'm just going to stop sharing the screen and see if there are any questions from anybody. We've got on the Q&A, if you've used the chat function as well. You can unmute yourselves as well. I've made sure that you've got access to unmute, and so please unmute. And we've only got one question on the Q&A. Please, can we have a copy of those slides? Yes, you can. Of course, Helen, not a problem. And we'll, as I say, there'll be the webinar is recorded and will be on the website, and we'll have a PDF version on there that you can drop down as well. And I'm just
in the Q&A, Richard, from Julia Wilson.
Another question. Okay, great. Can we plant the 2D trees against fences as well as walls? That's a good question. Lewis.
Yeah, well, you can. It kind of depends on the fence and the integrity of the fence, to be honest. Usually what people would do is put in some sort of wooden stakes, very sturdy, with wire and tension buckles and stuff, because trees of this size and on this rootstock will eventually exert quite a force upon that vertical surface. So I wouldn't just do it up against any old kind of, you know, sort of like standard fencing. It'd have to be something fairly sturdy. But yeah, it can be done.
Thank you.
Yeah, please unmute if you, we've got one more from Kevin. What material will the tree guards be made of? It's a wire, metal wire, like a chicken wire mesh that will be arriving with your packs that you'll be able to wrap around the trees. Does that answer your question, Ken? I think so. You can unmute.
I have unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. You're not using the cardboard ones?
No, we're not using cardboard. No, we're using wire because they're longer term. They're much more durable than cardboard.
Okay.
Joyce Borman is asking, if we cannot get an application in before the 16th of November, can we be assured of a tree allocation in the spring?
Absolutely, Joyce. Yes, of course. The application form will remain open until I think the 23rd of February. So there's two tranches. There's the autumn tranche, which, as I say, closes on the 16th, midnight on the 16th of November, and your trees will arrive the National Tree Planting Week, which is the week commencing the 30th of November, so the first week of December. Then it will remain open. Keep applying, keep sharing the application form as well with colleagues in other schools. And then it will close finally for the planting season on the 23rd of February, and trees will arrive. We're hoping the 8th of March, that week commencing the 8th of March.
Caroline Niven asks, how do we know what stakes to buy?
Well, you will actually be getting provided some stakes
Yeah.
with these packs. Just on the issue of staking, I won't go too much into it now and guarding. Young trees, once they're planted, they are going to be vulnerable for a while. So largely, when we're, if you mulch your trees, that's going to really help in terms of, as I say, contractors or whoever's managing the grass around those trees, because it's a nice visual indicator. So do that, because it will help look after the trees. But you might end up, if you find your trees are getting a bit battered and children are playing around the trees and you're not kind of cordoning any of the trees off in the initial first years, which isn't ideal because you want as much interaction as possible, you might consider a more robust guard. And I can advise on that going forward. These will probably be fine for now, but as the trees grow, you might want something a bit more robust, but we can discuss that a bit more perhaps in the next webinar.
Yeah, and any questions, use our schools@treecouncil.org email address, and we'll field those questions off to technical questions around school orchards off to Lewis, and curriculum questions, if I can't answer them, off to Mary as well. So yeah, please, I know what happens at the end of these webinars, you think, oh, I just wanted to ask. Well, I use our email. It's on the landing page of Orchards for Schools.
When is the next webinar?
Good question. We have another webinar, which is planting and growing your orchards. That's going to be led by myself and Lewis. And we're looking like the date's going to be the 4th of November, 4 till 5. And you'll get a chance to book on that. Next week, we'll be sending out the summary documentation on Eventbrite, so we'll send that in.
Christina Bell asks, can you plant the trees in pots first?
In the root systems, when these trees arrive, may be fairly substantial. So unless you're talking about really large pots, you may have an issue there. Another issue is then actually having them somewhere where they're going to stay upright, because actually you may well find that they topple over easily in the wind and stuff. So they'd have to be somewhere really, really sheltered temporarily. I would advise putting them in the ground if you're going to leave them before planting for any amount of time, just because there's less chance in a pot, even with some soil around the roots may still be exposed to kind of frost, for example, whereas in the ground they're going to be a little bit more firmly insulated. So if possible, just plant them somewhere temporarily in the ground. Look up the process of healing in, that's what we call it when we temporarily plant them, healing in. I would definitely go for the ground. If you definitely can't, then try and get the largest pots that you can and make sure they're in a sheltered space.
Right. Helen, thank you so much. This has been very informative. Thank you. Just one last question. Will these trees be available on a yearly application? Yes, they will. We have a restricted number of tree packs available, but we're estimating we've got enough for about 2,000 schools, and that we would be distributing those over the next 3 years. It all depends on the demand, but as it stands at the moment, this is our pilot year. We look to distribute, I think it's something like 1% of the overall schools across the UK, so about 400 tree packs across the UK, and then we'd look to grow that demand over the next 2 years. But yes, we have hopefully enough for about 2,000 schools, which is a significant amount of packs. Yes, it did make sense. Thank you, Helen. Did my answer make sense? Yes. Brilliant. Caroline, thanks. I'm a tree warden for a village, and we'll share this with a school. Thank you. That's great. Yes, and we do have, as I say, Mary mentioned, and we're mentioning a number of times, we're really keen to get the tree wardens engaged, and there'll be a webinar to prepare tree wardens for working with schools later in this autumn. So that'll be another opportunity for them to contact their local schools and start promoting the Orchards to Schools programme and supporting their schools on the ground. As mentioned, they're very experienced, and tree wardens fantastic. They've got backgrounds in Ofsted and landscaping, some of them. So yeah, they really are brilliant to have on board and provided advice and support. Okay, well, we've just run over a little bit, but as I say, all this information will be on the webinar, will be on the website, so you'll be able to download it, watch it, feedback, share it with colleagues, and if you're the focal contact point for the school, then yeah, please do that. Please make sure that you share the information as much as you can. There is another webinar coming, as we mentioned, planting and growing on the 4th of November, and at the same time, and that'll be a chance for you to really think about that process of planting the trees, as already mentioned in Lewis's session in the presentation, but it's going to be a more detailed opportunity for you. And look out for the Orchards to Schools guide, which is coming out early next week, and that's going to have step-by-step handheld opportunity for you to get some more information and help you plant, care, and look after your trees. Great. Thank you very much. I don't think we have any more questions.
No. I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you again, everybody, and have a pleasant evening. And I'm sure we'll see you again soon.